The following story has been brought to you by StoriesToInspire.org.
In Eretz Yisrael, there was a particular principal of a particular school in one of the outlying communities in Eretz Yisrael. And one day the principal is in the chatzeris, in the yard of the school, and he sees an elderly gentleman coming, and he's holding the hands of a little girl, and he's bringing her to school. And all of a sudden it clicks. One of the teachers had mentioned that there's a little girl whose grandfather brings her to the school pretty often, and she's always late. He figured, you know what, maybe it's a good opportunity to talk to the grandfather, to figure out what's happening, and give chizuk if necessary. So he waits till the grandfather brings the girl into the school, and he walks over and he says, Shalom Aleichem, what's your name, Rabbi, etc., etc., and he begins to talk with him, and they sit down on a bench and they start schmoozing. And the grandfather shares how he has a difficult life, a challenging life. He's raising this little girl, she's from a dysfunctional home, and often till he gets himself together and he gets her out takes time. And as it is, they struggle financially, and he struggles with this. And the principal remembers that they barely ever pay schar limud, they barely ever pay tuition, 100 shekel here, 200 shekel there. And he says to the grandfather, can I ask you a personal question? What do you do for a living? And the fellow hems and haws, and he says, I'm involved in money transactions. Really? What type of money transactions? The fellow doesn't want to tell him. And at one point, all of a sudden, the fellow says, you want to know what I do for a living? You want to know what my money transactions are? I'm a ganav. I'm a thief. But I'm not a bad thief. Principal's eyes are popping out of his head. You're a ganav, you're a thief. You admit it to it, but you're not a bad thief? What does that mean? He says, I only break into homes when people are not there. I don't want to scare them. When they have a simcha, I come in. I don't take all their money. I don't take all their valuables. Just a few hundred shekel here to sustain me a few more days. Maybe a golden necklace, which I know will help me for another week or two. But I always leave the house neatly. I don't ransack it. I'm an honorable ganav, and I don't really mean to hurt people. I'm just in a desperate situation. Honorable ganav, the principal says. I didn't know there was such a thing. He goes, yes, and I'm going to share with you what I mean I'm an honorable ganav. He says, just last week, I broke into a home. I heard there was a family simcha. I came into the home. The home was mamish empty. There was no money. There were no valuables. I even looked in the fridge, and there was kemat nothing to eat. And my heart went out. And I reached into my pocket, and I pulled out a 200 shekel note, and I left it on their kitchen table. I may be a thief, but I'm not a bad person. And the principal was so nisragish, he was emotionally moved. And he says, you're not a thief at all. You're a good person. You have a Yiddish heart. You care about other people. You're in a bad situation. Don't call yourself a thief. You're short-selling yourself. You're in a person that's in a pinch, but look at the proof. Instead of taking money or taking something, you give when you can. And this grandfather wipes a tear from his eye and he says, thank you, that was inspiring, and he walks away. A few days later, he comes back to the school and he drops off his granddaughter, late as usual. He makes his way to the principal's office and he says, I want you to know something. That conversation that we had a few days ago, it's hurting my parnasa. It's cutting into my bottom line. We mamish have no money in our home now. The principal says, why? He goes, since you pointed out that I'm not really a thief, but at some I'm a good person, and deep down I have a Yiddish heart, every time I want to go and steal, I want to go in Ganva. I can't bring myself to do it. You're cutting into my parnasa. The principal smiles and says, there are other alternatives. Let me see if I can find you something. And the principal found him an honorable type of parnasa. It didn't bring in a lot of money, but at least it was who the fellow really was, a Yid with a good heart. And the rest of the story is that this little girl grew up, Baruch Hashem, and she's okay, etc., etc. What does this story have to do with Pesach? It has everything to do with Pesach. Do you know that Klal Yisrael were on the 49th level of Tumah at the time of Yetzias Mitzrayim? They were literally like the Mitzrim. On some level, perhaps you could say they were ganavim, they were thieves, they were morally corrupt. There was almost nothing left. But on Leil HaSeder, first night of Pesach, the Rabbi Shalom pointed out to us that maybe 49 components of who we are is rotten, but it's not who we really are. Who we really are was that Nekuda HaPnimis, that inner spark, that flickering flame that was still alive. And as soon as we began to identify with that 1/50th of our essence, slowly but surely that 1/50th began to take us over until we stood at Matan Torah and we were 1/50th. That 1/50th turned into 50. We went from 1 to 50 because our essence wasn't a ganav. It wasn't corrupt. It wasn't something wrong. A whole year long, there are parts of our personality, our persona, our avodah that maybe we're not so proud of. But deep down, Ritzaneinu lasas Ritzainecha, the Gemara says, we want to do what's right. What's ma'akev, says the Gemara, Sar Shebe'isa, Chametz. Pesach is a time for matzah. a time for purity, a time to focus on who we really are, on the Pintalayid, on the part of us that's amazing. And Leil HaSeder is the opportunity to take that tiny spark and help it burst into a powerful flame that eventually will take us all over. Wishing you an amazing Leil HaSeder, a beautiful Pesach, a Pesach of growth, a Pesach where you could kindle that spark and have tremendous nachas ruach from it. Chag kosher v'sameach.
Enjoyed this story? Come again. Bring a friend. StoriesToInspire.org